Hopefully you've recovered from all the campaign conversation.
Oh, yes.
I know
Very,
that one usually sparks a lot of conversation and thinking and planning and all that stuff.
well, yeah, and it's I really appreciate you trying to get us to grasp the foundational kind of architecture. I mean, kind of the big picture behind campaigns and segments and how those relate to projects and whatnot. So it'll just take a bit, I think, at least for me to feel a little bit more fluent in it. But I think I've got enough of the basics to, at least start trying some stuff out. I'm sure I'll end up with more questions as I actually try to implement our processes and actually define our processes better. But that's the whole point of why we're moving to Virtuous.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's like we have these 1 hour trainings where we can get as much in. And I always know that, again, a lot of what I do is a conversation starter.
Mhm.
I try to give you as much ammunition as I can. And then you're going to go back and look at everything and say, okay, now how do I apply that to this stuff? So I can try to point you in the right direction as much as possible. But, what we talk about in an hour usually means a lot more work than just an hour.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
So if I do a training and then you have nothing to do afterwards, that's a problem.
Mm. Yeah, I'm anticipating the next couple months being, I'm just kind of gritting my teeth but I'm really anticipating, honestly, what I'd love to come out of this whole transition process is just feeling so much more comfortable about our overall CRM system. So, and I think we're on a good path to get there.
That is good. Yeah, the thing is, some of what we talked about today of kind of backing into it from approaching it from breaking down your communications and then using those and grouping them into campaigns. That's an easier way sometimes for some folks to get their head around it, but it's a process. And I usually say to people, it's going to be this year is where you kind of put a little bit of faith in us and a little bit of faith in Virtuous, and you just kind of try to adapt as best you can. And after you've been in Virtuous for a little bit, you'll start to really feel a little bit more fluent in it.
Okay.
And then you'll go from there. Okay. Well, we've got our time.
Yeah, probably just you and me this time.
And that's what I figured. This is usually a smaller group. If I get on the admin training and I've got 12 people on the phone, I usually ask questions because that's alarming to me. Shouldn't have everybody knowing how to change everything, right? And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about right now, right? With this particular session, there are some organizational settings that we'll walk through briefly, just some things that you can control as the admin. But a lot of this session is really devoted to managing and giving access to your users and managing their permissions and that structure. And then time permitting, we can dive into a few other things that you can do as an admin to just kind of own your instance of Virtuous because it's yours. But let's start with that discussion of users. And so if you don't mind, if you just want to take me through, and don't worry too much about, well, what does Virtuous let me do or not do, or how does it work? But just in terms of your needs, what are some of the different user groups or teams or roles that you have? And within those roles, are there specific things that you want people to be able to do or not do, or see or not have access to?
Yes. So I'll do my best here. So
Sure.
John, we met this morning. He will be particularly interested in the dashboards and, in donor relations and knowing what the next logical step to do with his, particularly with the major donors. And so that's going to be his primary thing. We haven't talked at all about the mobile app, but he'll be leaning heavily on that from a contact perspective, from a donor perspective. And so obviously, since he's the main guy, he'll want full access. But his primary focus is going to be What's the status of my donor base? What should I do next? And how do I really improve our donor relations? And some of that, I'm hopeful that as we grow into this, we can start using the automation features to have the data be telling us what to do, and assigning tasks and whatnot. So that's John.
Okay.
Laura, she's our back office person, so she'll be mostly interested in the gift entry aspect and the interfacing out to our bookkeeper. So she'll be doing all the gift entry stuff and exporting files for our bookkeeper.
Okay.
Then I'm going to be kind of the main system administrator, and I'll be jack of all trades and probably being the go-to person to say, hey, how do I make it do this? And before they call you guys up, they'll come to me. And my long-term goal is to be able to leverage some of the automation features, the marketing automation stuff. I'll be primarily responsible for the outbound communications and building up the campaign structures and the project structures and all that stuff.
Okay.
Then we have one other person, Ken, who will be mostly wanting to be able to run queries, mostly financial queries. What's it look like? What's this quarter looking like? And he'll probably be very interested also in some of the, he's super keen on the donor life cycle automation thing, keeping tabs on, where different people are in that, and again, helping John make decisions on who he's talking to and what he's talking to them about.
Okay.
So that's basically our team.
All right. So there's no one else who needs like limited access or board members, volunteers, anything like that?
Well, Ken is a board member, but he'll have, and I'll have a clear idea when you go through what the different permission levels are. John's wife, Jennifer, she'll probably want, some amount of user access, because she'll probably be, she might be a go-to person for her husband, John, to just say, hey, can you run a quick query on such and such? And rather than always having to turn to me, he might turn to her and to do that stuff. And that's kind of what she's done in Salesforce in the past.
Okay.
So that's pretty much our full team.
Well, and that's good. I mean, no one needs any kind of intense limitation. Like, hey, they can only see these, 100 contacts, or they can only see, donations from certain projects or things like that. So that's pretty straightforward.
No,
all things considered.
Yeah, we're on the small end, and so we'll be more open kimono than anything. I mean, kind of almost our default will be give people pretty big access unless we need to, pull back.
And that's fine. So the big thing is, and this is what I say a lot, right? There's a difference between having access to see everything and having access to affect and change everything, right?
Yeah.
Because people tend to think of permissions as I want to hide data. I don't want people to see these numbers. I don't want them to know what our top campaigns look like. And it's not always the case. It might simply be to say, hey, look, I want them to, and it's in our DNA to say, hey, data needs to be shared. It needs to be open within your organization. But just because you're being open with data and sharing it does not mean that everybody needs to be able to change everything, right? They shouldn't be able to monkey with stuff necessarily just because they can see it. So I think that's the big difference. Okay, so for starters, we're going to spend a lot of today here in this settings area. Okay, settings and configuration. Hanging out here. Real quickly, before we jump into some of the user stuff, just as the admin, you have access to all of this, obviously. Your more limited users won't have all of these same options when they come into settings. And you can manage some of the organization settings. If I click on Manage Organizations, you can change the name. I will say, please don't rename your sandbox, because that makes it very hard for us. But if you want to change the name so that you change the way it appears, totally fine. You can make sure that you've got the time zone set correctly, that all these settings are correct. This default cash accounting code is something that does impact QuickBooks and syncing data to QuickBooks, making sure that you've got that cash accounting code set here. We mentioned this when we talked about gift entry. There was that cash code on the gift, and I had mentioned, hey, that's really something that you're going to manage in settings. And this is what I meant by that. And this would be the default account code that you use for cash flowing into QuickBooks before it gets distributed to all the different GL accounts. So general fund is in here by default, but you can edit that value. You can also affect the contact proximity. That is an organizational setting. That contact proximity affects what you see in the contact header when you have the relational giving widget selected in that header. So here we have giving by project. We can remove that because your default is that relational giving widget, and that always has that little notation of how many donors are within 10 miles. That's the default, but again, you can change that setting if you want to. You can make sure the fiscal year start is correct. That way, when you pull fiscal year statistics, they'll be correct. You can enable outgoing grants, grant-making organizations. You do have the ability to require that the full amount of every gift is designated to a project. That way, if you're entering a $100 gift, split two ways. Right? If you said, hey, there's a $100 gift, $50 goes to Epicenter, and then you forgot to designate the other $50, that in the gift import tool would actually end up in that update needed category. And it would say, hey, hold on, you need to tell us where the other $50 is going. It'll stop you from doing that. So that is an option. It's off by default, but you can turn that on. And then this auto create pledges on import actually doesn't really affect you. That would only be for folks who are using a third-party giving integration from another provider. Okay, so that's everything that you can manage there. Now the big thing is adding your users and then assigning their permissions. Adding users is pretty easy. That's this team members section, right? You just go into manage team. Here you all are. You can go in and say, okay, I want to invite a team member, plug in their email address, make sure you assign them the right permission settings. You can assign them to an organization group if needed, and then invite that user. Now, in terms of the permission groups themselves, you're going to have to set those up first. Okay, and all that's here under Manage Permissions. Hey, look, I'm playing around with volunteers. So when we set you up, your live environment, you'll always have 3 different permission groups out of the box. You've got admin, you've got no financial data, and user. All right, those are the basic 3. Admin's pretty straightforward. Admin is admin. Right? You're omniscient, you're omnipotent. You can see all, you can do all in Virtuous. I always recommend you want, it's best to have 2 and at a maximum 3 admins for any org. When you have only 1 admin, the problem is you're out for any period of time, there's no backup, then that's a problem. right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you need someone else who can do some of those admin things. So you don't want to have one fail point for the organization. But if everybody's an admin, then you have a few too many hands in things, right? Too many people who can go in and add new tags to the database and do all kinds of other stuff, and it kind of it makes it harder to manage. So one admin, one backup, that's generally the way to go. Okay. The admin permission group, you can see here, it can't be modified. It is what it is. You're an admin, you own it. These other two, user and no financial data, they're pretty much what they say on the label, right? User is pretty much a middle of the road user. No financial data, you can't see any money. Both of those can be edited. So if you like that permission setting, but you really wish that user had a little tweak to it, go ahead and tweak it. Or you can create a whole new permission group from scratch, kind of like this one here. So we'll go ahead and do that. We're going to click on create a permission group. We're going to call this one training. And then that description, right, this is for admin training. That description is great when you do have that backup admin. If they have to modify someone's permissions, they know what this particular permission group is for and what it does. Because sometimes you'll have a permission group that you might call like finance. Well, what does finance really mean, right? And then if you put a notation here, this is for users who need to be able to do GIF processing and manage and access the query tool. Great, I know what that's about. Hit save. And that takes me in here to edit this permission group. And this is the same thing you would see if you went in to edit one of the existing permission profiles, like no financial data or user. It takes you to the same screen. And so from here across the top, you've got all these different areas of Virtuous, all these different objects up here, right? And for each of those, you're going to select what permissions this group has for, in this case, events. What can they do in the event space? And for most of these, you've got these same three basic permissions. You've got read permission, you've got write permission, and you've got delete permission. All right, so read, you can see stuff. Delete, you can delete stuff, pretty straightforward. Write actually means two separate things. Write permission means that you can create and that you can edit. So if I have write permission on contacts, that means that I can edit existing contacts. I can change their name, their address. I can edit phone numbers, things like that. It also means I can add new contact records to the database, whole cloth. Okay, those two things go hand in hand. You know, creating is really just editing for the first time, if you want to think about it that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Are your standard like user and no financial data, are those groups or permissions documented somewhere? Like if I went in and I edited the user one and saved on top of, you know, I didn't make my own one for whatever reason, and I wanted to know, well, what did it start out as? Are those documented somewhere?
It's not in the support documentation, but we could easily help you with that too.
But I'm assuming generally speak, like if I did want to tweak what the user, you know, out of the box user definition was, can I create a copy of that user and call it, you know, eternal impact user and then edit from there? Or would I start from scratch?
You would start from scratch. Now, if you go in and you click edit on the user permission group, though, you can see what permissions are selected. Because I can click on contact and I can see what's checked off. So you have visibility to see what it looks like right now. But yeah, if you went in and modified the existing one and you said, wow, hey guys, I messed up and I really wanted to go back to what the default was, we can help you out with that pretty easily.
Okay. Sounds good.
Now for these here, anything you want to give someone permission to do, you just check the box, right? If you want to enable all very quickly, you've got that up at the top. If someone does not have any of these permissions, then they won't even see this as an option. So for example, if I don't have read, write, or delete permission on events, then the events icon doesn't even appear as an option in my menu. It's not there.
Right.
So there's not, and people aren't staring at a bunch of icons that they can't do anything with, right? They're not running into error messages all the time. It's just not even in the tool for them. That's the idea. So for campaigns, you've got just the read, write, delete permissions. Those are pretty straightforward. When it comes to contacts, you're going to notice, number one, there is no read permission for contacts because this is a CRM. And if you're in it, we assume you need access to contacts. That's what the whole thing is made up of, right? But you still do have the write permissions. That means you can create and you can edit contacts. And you have the delete permission. Now remember, you can't actually delete a contact. Can't be done. The only thing you can do is archive a contact. But this covers that. It would cover the ability to remove a tag, delete a phone number, delete an address, right? Remove a relationship, delete an individual from that contact. Those are all deleting actions that are covered by that delete permission. And then you've got a few other specific permissions in here for contacts. So the first one up here is this audit log permission. And this is one of a few sort of admin powers, so to speak, that you can grant to other users, right? You can give some of your admin tools to other users who have to have some sort of level of seniority sometimes. So the admin, or the audit log, excuse me, that is this account history that runs down the right-hand side to let you see who added an address, right? Who changed a phone number and things like that. That is not something that's in the basic user permission, but if you wanted someone to have that, if John wanted to have that, to be able to see that, you can add that to their permission profile. The ability to restrict tasks by owner, that just allows you to set it up so that users can only see their own tasks on a contact record. Tasks. Did you need to grab it?
No.
Oh, okay.
Shut it up. There you go. Sorry about that.
No worries. When you look at the task tab, if you look at the task screen, you only see your own tasks. But if you look at a contact record, you'll see them all, yours and someone else's. Restrict task by owner means you can only see your own. Okay, and then the view private allows you to see private contacts. Because remember, when you add a contact to the database, the default is to make them public. You can also set a contact up as private, right? If it's former president or something, make them a private contact. Then only admins can see that contact, as well as any users who have that view private permission on contacts. Okay,
Yep.
They'll be able to see private contacts. For everybody else, those contacts don't exist. And then the view wealth permission governs the ability to access the little section where you have donor search data. Because a lot of times folks will say, hey, look, I don't have any problem with seeing what someone is given and what their home address is, but I feel funny letting someone know what their house is worth and what their real estate value, what their stock portfolio value is. Fair enough. So you can restrict access just to that wealth data section. Now, like we said before, it's possible to set somebody up with access to everything, but not necessarily access to edit everything, right? And so I get asked a lot when people say, hey, look, my executive director needs to see everything, but can I make them read only? Is that possible? Sure, right? And a lot of orgs might limit the ability to write contacts. They don't want everybody adding new records to the database. They want to keep some controls around that. And that's fine to do, even for example, John, if you wanted to say, hey, look, you don't have write permission on contacts, but he still has to manage, like you said, all the different touch points, the cultivation process with major donors. You can still do that because contact notes have their own separate permission. So even if I don't get to edit contact records, I can still log activity. I can still go in and say, hey, I called them and here's what happened. And so your notes will have those read, write, delete permissions, right? And then there's two others that are related to your private notes. So number one, there's the ability to view private, just like with a private contact, right? When I enter a private note, that's my note. I can see it, admins can see it, but other users can't. You could also set up certain users to say, well, you have the ability to view private notes.
And is privacy on notes and privacy on contacts, are they interrelated or independent?
Nope, independent. You can be a public contact where I log a private note.
So a private contact could have public notes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
2 separate permissions. Now the other one up here, default to private, is literally just that, because we have some organizations that have a lot of users that are all logging notes as private, and they want to keep it that way, so they make sure that they default to private automatically. For email, you can allow someone to manage the email list settings, so actually creating the lists themselves. You have up to 25 email lists that you can create. And then you have separate permissions for who gets to add or remove individuals from those lists. Okay. Events, straightforward, read, write, delete. Then we get into gifts. So here you've got the read, write, delete permissions again. Right. Here's where I see a lot more folks say, hey, you just get read permission. You know, nobody gets delete permission outside of admins. And very few people, if at all, have write permission on gifts, but everybody can see them. Totally fine. Now you have the view private permission here as well. So remember, you have that private concept on gifts, but it's slightly different. Because with a private contact or a private note, if I'm a regular user, I don't have the view private permission, I can't see that contact or that note. They don't exist to me.
Mm-hmm.
But with a private gift, if I'm a regular user and I don't have view private permission, I can still see that gift. The difference is I have no idea who made that gift, because private gifts are anonymous.
Yeah, okay, got it.
So if someone says, hey, I want to give you a large check, but I would like to remain anonymous, you can enter that gift as private. Other users can still see that gift on the gift screen, for example, but it'll always say anonymous donor. You can give someone permission to see those donors. Okay. You've got this view statistics permission. So when I look at a contact record, and if I go to the giving tab, and I want to look at gifts, what's this here? So this is covered by the read permission on gifts, but that doesn't really have an impact on this up here, because what I see up here in the header is not gifts, these are statistics. Mm-hmm. Right, they're calculated. So that's covered by the view statistics permission. They're 2 separate permissions, right? When I look at reports on the dashboard, and when I look at my dashboard widgets, I'm seeing statistics in a lot of places that are calculated. Mm-hmm. You'll notice that the no financial data permission does not have read permission on gifts, and it also does not have the view statistics permission. If I really don't want someone to see financial data, I've got to take away both.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. The restrict by project isn't something that we have to worry about for you guys based on everything you laid out. What that does is it lets you restrict someone to seeing only gifts to a project that they own. So if I have someone who is raising funds solely for, you know, we talked about the Epicenter campaign today. So if there's raising funds solely for that, and I don't want them looking at general fund or anything else, I could set them up as an owner of that project and say, those are the only gifts you can see. That's what the restrict by project does.
That would be appropriate, I think, for us. I'm just ad-libbing here, but we may have projects associated with individuals raising funds for a mission trip. So we might want to give them a very limited view into their particular project. And so I guess we could give them, restrict them only to project that they own, which would be their individual fundraising for their.
Well, yeah, and I mean, that's really what this is for. It's kind of like the missionary permission. And we have a lot of missionary organizations. And so that's who tends to use a lot of the private note permissions, because 3 different missionaries might be raising funds from the same person, and organization doesn't want them each to know, right? They don't want to know that Bob is giving to Sarah and Bob is giving to Harry. You know, each of them has their own relationship, so they'll all manage that by having private notes and defaulting their notes to private, so that even though 2 of them are interacting with that same donor, neither one of them realizes it. And then on giving, they'll restrict their gifts by project. So missionary A is raising their funds. They'll see those gifts, even if a gift is split. You know, if it's a $100 gift split, $50 to project A, $50 to project B. and I own project A but not B, when I look at that gift, it's a $50 gift to me. That's all that I know. That's all that I can see. So this restrict by project does let you cut down on the gift data someone can see. There's another permission, which is the permission tied into organization groups, that allows you to restrict what contacts someone can see. So if you do have someone who is raising their own support and you want them to see their own donors but no one else, you would use organization groups to control that visibility. And we can talk about that after we get through some of this here. Okay, so this restrict by project idea shows up in a lot of things that are project gift adjacent, right? So gift asks have the same idea, along with read, write, and delete. You'll see the same thing on pledges as well, restrict by project idea. Pledges are very much like gifts. And you'll see the inverse of it on the project permission, the restrict by owner, to say, hey, you can only see a project that you own, right? You can't see all the other projects. Now we skipped over grants. This would be for the grant management tool, read, write, delete, where you can't access it. And then for imports, you have read, write, delete permissions. The tendency is to say, well, I've got someone who's going to do gift processing, so I need to give them read and write permission on imports, obviously. If I did only that, right, for Laura, she's going to be doing a lot of the gift entry, gift processing. If I said, okay, here you go, you got read, write permission on imports, go to town. Well, that's great. That gives you access to the import tool, but then you wouldn't be able to do anything there. Because when you do gift entry, right, we created a new contact, we created new gifts, you can do all those things. So to do gift processing, you have to have read and write permission on imports. You have to have read and write permission at minimum on gifts. I would also recommend view private for whoever's doing that. And you have to have write permission on contacts. I also recommend view private if at all possible. That person doing gift entry has a lot of access to data, and they're the one who's really responsible for keeping it clean. Given what you laid out in terms of the different roles, I would say that's who I would look at first as your sort of backup admin. Because that person who's doing gift processing already has a lot of power and a lot of access in the database anyway. And if there's someone that can be trusted with all of that and they're pretty good with all of it, they'd probably be a natural fit to be the backup admin anyway.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Again, just so I'm clear, if I wanted to know specifically how Virtuous has set up the user, what they define as user, I would have to go through each one of these and note the settings, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Now for integrations, you've got read, write, delete permission or nothing at all. That way, if you have someone who's going to be doing some IT work, but you don't want to give them admin access, you don't want to monkeying with gifts and tags and contact data, but you do want them to be able to set up and manage webhooks or integrations to other systems, you could give them just integration access. Okay. Merge is pretty straightforward. It's the ability to use the merge tool. Either you can use it or you can't. That's it. Just execute. That's something that I always recommend being very strict with, right? As an admin, you can use it. We have a couple of other users who maybe can use it, but you want to be careful because merging is where people tend to make a mess of their database. Because nobody likes merging duplicates. It stinks. I mean, maybe someone out there likes it. I don't know. But for the most part, it's just kind of tedious. And so what happens a lot of times is someone will sit someone down with the merge screen and they'll say, hey, Virtuous identified all these as potential duplicates. Go through and clean it up, please. And they'll do that with like a volunteer, right? Or like an intern or something. And that person has no context. They have no knowledge of who these donors are. So they just merge them all. They cleaned up. But maybe they shouldn't have all been merged. They might not all actually be duplicates. Well, the problem is once you merge those records, there isn't an unmerge. Right? Now you've archived one contact, you've merged their data into another contact, you've updated pointers on the back end for future pledge payments and recurring tasks, all of that. So it's not something that can easily be undone. So you just want to control that pretty carefully.
Okay.
Plan gifts just have your read, write, delete permissions. We already mentioned pledges, and we mentioned projects, right? Read, write, delete, and then restricting by the project owner. Now, just like with contacts, because if you do have folks that are raising their own support, projects tends to be where they would interact a lot, right? Be able to see their data. You have some granular permissions here too, to be able to say, hey, you can see projects, but not expenses. Or maybe you can see projects and you can edit expenses, but not goals, right? Or, you know, this is read only, but you can write on project notes. Totally fine. Now queries, you got two permissions here. This one at the bottom, this reminder source, this one's, you know, pretty minor, really. It's something that's set up as just an admin feature, but you can give it to other users if you want to. And all that is access to a specific query type. That query type is the automated tasks query type. The whole reason this exists is, let's say you have a user who set up some recurring tasks and some automated tasks for themselves, and then they leave the organization. And you want to be able to query for all those tasks to now assign them to a new user. That's what this is for. Lets you do that in bulk. Now the other permission here, execute, governs whether or not you can use the query tool at all. Now everybody that you ran through, and you know the 4 users that you kind of outlined, everybody there has a role that would require the query tool. But if you do have some of these folks that are restricted users that are raising their own support, I would not give them access to the query tool. Anybody that is a restricted user, if you have restrict by project on gifts, if you're restricted based on organization group for contacts, then if you want to generate lists and you want to access data, really you should be using filters and not queries. Filters will reflect that user's permissions. Queries will not. Queries will return the actual value stored in the database. That's one of the main differences between them. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. For reports, so here we've got this whole list of reports. These are all the dashboard reports that are available. And down at the very bottom, there's this last permission called view. That's really the most critical one here, because if you don't have view permission, none of these other things matter. View is what allows you to actually run reports. Okay, and then here you can go through and pick and choose which reports someone has access to. To me, this is really a valuable permission for every group, even if someone is going to have a lot of access within the tool. John would be a good example. Have a lot of access to data, but he's very focused on some of the the donor activity, cultivating relationships. He's probably never going to have a reason in his life to want to go in and pull the accounting batch report. So he probably doesn't want to have to scroll through that when he's pulling reports, right? So it's a really good chance to identify, well, what are the critical reports for this person's role? What do they really need access to? Or what is it that they just never need access to? Because I'll filter those out of their report selection, right? So he's probably going to want to see the activity report to be able to see the campaign reports and know what's going on. If you've got the campaign reports, you've already kind of got event giving. This is something that's more, if I'm like the event manager, maybe I want to see it in that event view. If he wants it, fine. Right, the gifts by channel, you can report on that as well as seeing it in the widget on the dashboard. Right, and then maybe he's really focused on the major donor listing. The organization group report is good if you're using organization groups to manage, say, portfolios for MGOs, because then you can see what activity's been logged for that group, the giving for everybody in that group who's assigned to that portfolio or that owner, right, for that time period. And then down here, the rolling 12-month report. John probably want that to be able to see the overall trends. And that might be about it. All right, so that's a lot of reports like pledge drive, pledge payment, project assessment, pledge aging. You may not need all that stuff. So then that makes it a lot easier to run reports. So I'm a big fan of using this for every single group and really going through and being critical and saying, okay, what are the reports that are really most necessary? Virtuous marketing is just access to Virtuous marketing to get into the other side of the tool where you can send email and manage Virtuous giving and things like that. You might have some users, certainly those restricted users, you won't want to have access over there. And then volunteer opportunities and workflow automation, both of those are just your read, write, delete permissions. And that's it.
Okay.
And once you've gone through and made these selections, you would update, right, to be able to save it. And now your permission group is set. I can go back to manage permissions here in my breadcrumbs, and there's that new training permission group right in there. So in terms of process, right, when you go live, you're going to get access to your live database. Step one would be to go in then and set up your user permissions, set up your permission groups. So you can use this sandbox environment to test those out, to play around with the permission structure, so that when you do go live, you're kind of ready to roll, right? Because you'll get access to the live database. You'll want to set up those permission groups so that then you can add users to the live database. Okay, and when you do set these up, I'd also recommend changing the default. The default out of the box is always admin. Okay. The default permission is if you forget to set someone's permission level, they'll get assigned whatever the default is. And if you're defaulting to you have everything, well, that's kind of iffy. Me personally, I tend to like to set the default as no financial data. Number one, that user is going to let you know that they can't see anything. So it won't stay that way for very long. If you give them admin permission, they might be very quiet about it because they like having all that power. And number two, that way, if there is a window of time where they have that permission setting, no harm, no foul. Right? Nothing bad happens. They haven't gotten access to something they shouldn't have access to. They just have less access.
Right.
Okay. And then when you invite your team members, right, you go in and invite those team members. When you first send that invitation, the minute you send the invitation out, right, you'll see them in here as an invited user, but they won't really be a user yet. Okay, so if I were to invite a team member and I said that the email address is plus today, right, and I said okay, and the permission group is, I accidentally set it as admin, and I invite that user. There we go. Right now, it's just an invited user. They're not enabled, right? But I also can't go in and edit their permission group. Until that person accepts their invitation, I can't change the permission group that they're in. I can resend the invite if they say they didn't get it. I can delete them altogether if they really shouldn't be in here, but that's it. Okay, so that's why having that permission group and that default permission group set up is important. Now, everything that we just went through, nowhere in there did I tell you how to set up restricting someone to contacts. I said that's all a function of organization groups, and it is. Someone could have whatever permission group you want, and you can still restrict their access to contacts by using organization groups. Okay, and organization groups, and I can see you've got at least one set up in here, will allow you to create these subsets of contacts within your database, and then you can assign a user to that organization group and even restrict their access. And the easiest way to show you this is I'm actually going to switch out of your sandbox here, because since you mentioned having some of these restricted users, it sounds like this might be something that's actually necessary for you. Some of these folks that are raising their own support. Let's get into my sandbox here for just a minute. Come on, there we go. Okay. And so now I'm logged in here, and I'm actually logged into my sandbox in two different browsers as two different users right now. So over here, I'm an admin. I'm me. Fantastic. And then over here in Chrome, I'm actually logged in as one Mr. Fozzie Bear. Okay. Fozzie is a missionary. He's raising his own, he's raising his own support. So he's got a limited view of this database. If you look over here in his menu, he's got a lot fewer icons over there. Okay. And then if I go to the contacts page, you can see I've got a little over 1,000 contacts here in this database. If Fozzie does the same thing, he goes to the contacts page, for him, this is a database of only 24 contacts, because that's all that he has access to in his organization group.
Mhm.
Okay, and then I can click on, for example, Russell and Sally Hamilton over here. So these are Russell and Sally. There's some donors of his. You notice his screen looks different. He doesn't have the audit log over here, right?
Mhm.
He also doesn't have delete permissions, so he doesn't have a little trash can on any of the tags. He can't edit or add tags. Doesn't have a little plus sign, right? So he's got a lot more locked down permissions. He can still see stuff, right? And he can still go to notes, and he can, I think he has add notes, unless I've played with his permissions for some reason. Yeah. So he can still add notes, right? He can still document his activity. He can do all that sort of stuff. He just can't edit the actual contact data. So that's what that would look like. Now over here, I bring up, oh, let's spell his name correctly. Let's see. Did I spell his name wrong? There's Russell and Sally. So here's my view of Russell and Sally Hamilton as an admin.
Mhm.
Same contact. You can see the difference here. Number one, as an admin, I can see that they're in Fozzie Bear's organization group. That's what this little bubble up here tells me. I can also see that they're in Solicitor X's organization group. A contact can be in more than one group.
Okay.
Okay, they're not limited in that sense. But then Fozzie doesn't see all those bubbles. He just knows that they're his person. So again, it's a little more restricted. For Fozzie, they've given just over $4,000 lifetime. I can see that they've actually given almost $100,000 lifetime. The difference is Fozzie's only seeing gifts to his project.
Okay, got it. Mhm.
Okay, and if I go and look at their giving, I'll actually see that that's all from a single gift. Made in May 2016. Cool. Rainy Day Fund is one of Fozzie's projects. But if I actually look at their gift on May 2016 as an admin, you can see that was almost a $96,000 gift. The difference is it was split to multiple projects.
Mhm.
Fozzie is only seeing his split as a project owner. Okay. In terms of managing my organization groups, so they're right in here on that same team page in the settings. I've got a few groups set up in here. Here's one called another group. Look at that for more training. You can create an organization group. Looks like you did that already, right? Give it a name, a description. You can plug in a location if you want. The culture and exchange rate would only be if you're setting up users who are, going to be in your Belgium office, and they want to see their dashboard reported in francs, not in dollars.
Mhm.
You can say, okay, for any user assigned to this organization group, they have a different culture setting, and here's the exchange rate for showing them financial data.
Okay.
But for the most part here, I think we're just going to, we don't really need to worry about culture or exchange rate for these users. So here's another group. So here's one that I created. I added 2 contacts to this group. You can add contacts one at a time from the organization group page. You can also add contacts one at a time from the contact record itself. So if I'm in here looking at William Wells and I wanted to add him to that organization group, I could come in here and edit the contact, and this owners field, that's going to give me my organization groups.
Got it.
And I can say, hey, I want to add another group. There we go. So I can edit it on the contact itself. We reload this. There's William. And then up here is where I can assign a team member. Now, even though contacts can be in multiple organization groups, a user can only be in one, because this is the sphere around that user, right? It's not a Venn diagram. It's just one sphere. That's all they get. That's what they can see. But I could come in here and select somebody. Select Jeff right here. This permission group is user. There we go. And by default, it says that the limit contacts is set to yes. Okay, so that means that if Jeff were to log in right now, he's only going to see these 3 contacts and no others. That's it. I can even limit contacts for someone who's an admin. Now, if I wanted to edit this, I could say, hey, I want to assign Jeff to this group, but I don't want to limit him. I still want him to see everybody. I just want to know that he's attached to this group. That still has some functional elements to it.
Mhm.
Number one, if Jeff has permission to write contacts and he adds a new contact to the database, the system is going to assume it's one of his. So it's going to add them to his organization group.
And just so you said this, to make sure I caught it, that a user can only be assigned to one organization.
Correct. User can only have one organization group. Now, the other neat thing, and this would affect your users who are raising their own support. All right, let's get Jeff out of here. Oh, I should mention, by the way, a user who's assigned to an organization group, even if that user is an admin, cannot use the merge tool, even if it's in your permissions, right? Even if you're an admin, if you are assigned to an organization group, by default, you cannot use the merge tool.
Okay.
Okay. And that's just a protection because a limited user really can't use the merge tool. They might not be able to see all the possible duplicate contacts. And so to prevent that, if you're assigned to an organization group, merge tool will not work. You'll get an error message when you try to go there. It'll tell you don't have the right permission to do it.
So what would the occasion ever be to assign an admin to a user group? I mean, organization group.
Well, I've seen some folks do it because, again, organization groups do get used for portfolio assignments, right? To be able to say, hey, these 20 major donors are the relationships being managed by John, for example. I might create an organization group for him, and I put those 20 contacts into that group, and I assign John to that organization group. I've seen folks who are admins do it to themselves. They say, hey, here's my organization group. These are my relationships I'm managing, and then they are not able to access the merge tool. Now, they're an admin, so they also have the ability to fix that by taking themselves out of the org group. But that's what happens.
Okay.
Now, for those restricted users, I'm going to show you there's a neat thing built into the system. So here's William Wells. He's not in Fozzie Bear's group at all. Okay, but Fozzie owns these two projects, one of which I think is that rainy day fund. So let's go in and add a gift. So we'll go to our gift entry screen here. And my gift entry screen does not look like any real accounts gift entry screen because I am frequently going in and creating new batches to show things off in training and then not importing them. So I have a lot that just sit at processed. There you go. We'll add a new one. Our group. Let's do a check. We'll say that the gift is coming in today. We'll make it our default segment just for kicks. And we'll save this. So let's say we're going to add a new transaction, and this one is going to be from Mr. William Wells. There he is. So he's going to make this gift. It's going to be a $250 gift. Check number 678. Whoops. Tab too fast. We'll give it to the rainy day fund. And we'll put the total amount in the rainy day fund. Now, the minute I added the project, right, again, I added the split amount, right, I hit enter. So the minute the trash can showed up, this other field popped up right down here that says organization group. Because what I did is I made a donation to a project that is owned by a user who has an organization group. Whenever that happens, automatically the system will add the donor to that organization group. So that way, as someone new gives to Fozzie, I don't have to go in and actively manage constantly updating his group. It'll happen automatically as new donors give to his project. So he didn't have access to William Wells before. After I process this import, William will be added to Fozzie's group so that he can see William Wells' profile, and he can see that $250 gift.
Okay, got it.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So I know that was a lot, right? Because once you had mentioned that possibility of some of those restricted users, I wanted you to be able to see the tools that are available to be able to manage their access. Any other questions on any of this? Anything that we mentioned today that's still not super clear, or anything that I didn't touch on that you had as a question coming in?
No, I don't think so. You're right. It was a lot of information. So I feel kind of like I probably should have questions, but they'll probably arise when I do all this. Um, and the biggest question that I have, when we go live is going to be probably what guides my choices as to who gets assigned what permissions. But I'll cross that bridge when I come to it.
Well, and the biggest thing really is on your side more than ours, right? What do you want people to be able, and that's why I always say at the top of this training, right? Take Virtuous out of the equation. Because I have people say, well, I don't know what Virtuous will do or not do. Take that out of the equation just for your users. What is it that you want them to be able to do or not do, or see or not see, right? Does it create a problem if you have users being able to, so for example, if you do have someone who is a user who's raising their own support for their own mission trip, does it create a problem if they can see all of the organization financials?
Mm-hmm.
If the answer to that is yes, I imagine it probably is. If the answer is yes, then okay, I know I've got to restrict them. I've got to set them up as a project owner, and I've got to set them up with an organization group so that they're only seeing their slice of the database.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Does it create a problem if everybody has the ability to go into any gift and edit the amount or delete it? Well, yeah, your auditors would have a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
So then I've got to make sure that I've got my admins who have that ability. Be you, probably Laura, because doing gift processing, and then they're the only two who have delete. Maybe the only two who have delete and write permission on gifts. Everybody else is read only. Okay. But that's going to be the thing that drives that decision more than anything else.
Okay.
Sounds good?
Yeah. Sounds
okay.
good.
Well, hey, I will get these recordings up. Again, I keep bouncing from one thing to another during the day, so I usually get those up a little later. But then you can go back, and if I did say something that sounds kind of smart, you can find it. There are some articles and some of what we went through today too, so in terms of adding users and things like that, so some other resources. And then again, don't forget, when you do go live, we'll have that 1 hour of just kind of free Q&A so that you can ask for help on things that weren't as clear as you thought or anything like that, just to make sure that you guys are pretty well covered.
Okay. So let's see. What's our next? Is that our next?
Well, you should have an automation training in there
Yeah.
for automation marketing tools, and then the Q&A. Yep.
So that's on the 15th. So in a week. And yes.
Yep. So yeah. So we'll talk about automation next Tuesday.
Tuesday, and then the following Monday is our review Q&A.
There you go.
I have a question for you. Does that seem a little soon?
Well, what is your go live date, or what's your launch date?
Well, it's I think it's like the 15th or something, which is coming up very soon.
So that's next Tuesday?
Let me see. It's a little unclear from Emily's side as to what the actual day is, but let's just say it's coming up like either next week or the following week.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I usually say, hey, give yourself a week or two, right, to work in Virtuous and build up a list of questions. And it's funny because what happens a lot of times, you'll go live and you start thinking, oh, I forget how that works. Oh, I know we talked about this, but I don't think I've practiced it in the sandbox. I don't remember how to do it. And the tendency is to want to kind of fire off those questions either to the support team or to your success coach. And it's difficult because they kind of get lost in the shuffle a lot of times. There's a lot of back and forth. And so this gives us a chance to get together, review all those questions that you've had or that your team has, talk through it, make sure that you're clear, and just make sure that you guys are comfortable.
Yep.
So yeah,
Well,
if you want to push that back, you can. That's totally fine.
I might think about that because I want to use that hour as efficiently as possible. And I want to make sure that we've kind of like had our chance to like go through and try to discover for ourselves, go back and review before we burn our time with you, dealing with the Q&As that we're still stumbling on.
No worries. Yeah, if you want, you should be able to open up that calendar appointment, and then there'll be a link there to choose another date.
Let's leave it where it's at now, but as I get clarity on actually when we're going to go live and how I'm feeling personally, I may adjust that.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I'll be here.
All right. So we'll talk next week.
That's it.
All right. Thanks, Scott.
You got it. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.